Namaskar and welcome to Sansad Television. I am Vishal Dahiya and you're watching our show Perspective, where we bring you detailed analysis of key national and international issues. Today we're going to talk about Finance Bill 2023. Now on Friday, Lok Sabha passed the Finance Bill 2023, which gives effect to the financial proposals of the central government for the financial year 2023-24. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman introduced 64 official amendments to the Finance Bill, which was tabled in Parliament on 1st of February along with the budget proposals. Now the amendments include changes pertaining to the GST Tribunal, a hike in the securities transaction tax, changes to the taxation on real estate investment trusts and infrastructure investment trusts, levy of tax collected at source on all liberalised remittances or remittance schemes within India, and tax on gains arising from multiple mutual fund categories as well. Finance Minister also proposed setting up of a committee to look into the issues related to pension for government employees and evolve an approach to address the need of employees while also maintaining fiscal prudence. So today, in Perspective, we will discuss all aspects of Finance Bill 2023, specifically the amendments which have been brought by the Finance Minister, their importance, their significance as well, and what does those amendments mean for the general public at large. And for more on this, we're joined by a distinguished panel of experts. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with Shubhmoy Bhattacharjee, who is joining us here in the studio. Shubhmoy, welcome. He's consulting editor with the Business Standard. We're also joined by two more panelists. Let me introduce them as well. Professor Charan Singh, CEO of EGROW Foundation, is with us, and so is Ms. Meena Chaturvedi. She is ex-executive director of PFRDA, that is Pension Fund Regulatory Development Authority. Welcome to both of you as well. I'll begin with you, Shubhmoy, and I've tried to give some highlights of what kind of amendments the Finance Minister brought in the Finance Bill. But if you could add on to that and tell us in a nutshell, in a summary, that these are the key amendments which the Finance Minister brought, then from there onwards, we can look at those amendments one by one and figure out what they mean.
Well, Vishal, the basic reason why these amendments have been brought in is to simplify the tax treatment of investment instruments. That's a major perspective. Even the idea on pension scheme, the committee, that also is supposed to, in a way, broadly on the same lines. And this goes with what the Finance Ministry and the Government of India has been saying, that we want to ensure that there is more interest coming along on the investment structure of the society. Now, to do that, one of the first things that's happened, and which has occupied a large space in the newspapers today, is basically the change in the treatment of the debt mutual funds, the capital gain structure. Now, capital gain structure over last, the first time the capital gains tax was introduced was in 1950s. And then from there on, it's gone on. It's with Shanmugam Chetty, who was T.T. Krishnamachari, who was the first one who introduced the capital gains tax. And from there on, almost every single finance minister since 1990s have introduced changes in the capital gains tax. But all of those changes have been on the equity side. So sometimes taxation has been done on the dividends received by shareholders. Sometimes it has been taken away. Sometimes the long-term capital gains tax rates, those have been changed. Indexations have been brought in. Why is the indexation? Because that ensures that the taxation rate is calibrated to the inflation rate. Just as you have indexation of wages made, so similarly indexation of interest of income earned. So all of those, but every one of those was on the equity side. This is the first time when the capital gains tax structure is being touched on the debt side. So that itself shows why, because the debt market in India is one which is like picking up. We are talking about infrastructure investment in a big scale. One of the major instrument of that would be the expansion of the debt market. Mutual funds would be getting interested. So right at the beginning, the Finance Ministry is saying, look, I want to ensure that debt market mutual funds invest in debt instruments on the basis of the attractiveness of the paper. Not on the basis of the tax arbitrage. Because that doesn't create a very good resource flow. It essentially encourages people to look for, these avenues. And
the tax-saving avenues.
Tax-saving avenues. So it's saying that basically any interest income that comes because debt market in the mutual fund is being looked at mostly as an interest income, just like you get interest income on bank deposits, on provident funds, and so on and so forth. All of those will therefore be taxed at the same rate.
Okay.
Now, we can go into the details of that later, but that is one of the very major things that's been done.
Okay, indeed, we'll look at that aspect as well, and then from the common man's point of view also. But let me first bring in Dr. Chand Singh. Also, Dr. Chand Singh, in terms of these amendments, specifically from the taxation point of view, if you look at either we are talking about STT, that is Securities Transaction Tax, or other instruments like the Real Estate Investment Fund, the Infrastructure Investment Fund as well. How do you look at these changes? Why they were required? Of course, one aspect has been given by Shubh Moy. And also, what kind of impact will they have?
Basically, my own reading of these amendments was very simple. I thought the key thing where they raised the STT rate on futures partially, and then on options also, and also the withholding tax rate to 20% from 10%. I don't know why, but I have a feeling that we need to raise resources so they could see that here is an avenue which we can tap, and probably that is the reason that it has been done. That's my take on it.
Okay. And if you look at the other aspect in terms of, taxation, when we're looking at the debt side, not the equity side, as Shubh Moy is pointing out, being touched for the first time, why is that required?
I really, on the debt side, I'm not very sure what was the logic behind it. I'll have to think through this and come back to you, maybe in the course of discussion.
Okay. We'll come back to that as well. But Mr. Chaturvedi, it's not just about changes in the taxation part here, which we're talking about in terms of the amendments which have been brought by the Finance Minister, but significantly, she has also proposed setting up of a committee led by Finance Secretary when, talking about the pension issues related to the government employees, specifically the new pension scheme, saying that there have been representations from several quarters to, take a relook. And that also includes the fiscal prudence part. So how would you analyze this step and what can come out of it?
Okay. To start with, as I was a part of the initial team which co-authored the PFRDA bill, I would clarify that this new pension scheme was to operate at two levels. It was mainly created to cater to the need of the unorganized informal sector. Around 2003-04, when this bill was introduced and passed in the parliament, 93% of the labor force was from the informal sector without any kind of contractual employer related contracts. As a result, there was virtually no pension umbrella which covered them, whether it was a house help, whether it was a taxi driver or a thelewala on the road. We wanted to create some pension umbrella which could cover the unorganized sector. Now, this is also the time you must understand that the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act on fiscal prudence was passed by the Parliament. There is a very intricate connection between the two, because at that time, almost 50% of the central government resources were being pushed towards, pensionary and retirement benefits of its employees. And on the whole, the government engaged at the time only about 3% of the workforce. Mm-hmm. And the Fiscal Responsibility Budget Management Act mandated that the revenue deficit of the government should not exceed 3% of the GDP annually. Mm-hmm. Now, under these circumstances, the government had to take a very prudent and fiscal look at its expenses, and they realized that if they go on pushing the pension on the same defined benefit model that we had adopted, soon the expenditure on pension and retirement itself is going to edge out any kind of planned expenditure or investment expenditure or capex in the budget. Mm-hmm. And that is why I think these twin reforms, which I would call the second generation economic reforms, were brought in. This was to make available to the government liquidity for funding its planned schemes, as well as, to invest capex on infrastructure and other such activities. And that is one reason why from 1st January 2004, all the employees who joined Government of India were brought under the new pension scheme. That was the rational fiscal prudence primarily for the government, and also to create the first ever umbrella of pension for the unorganized informal sector, which constituted about 430 million persons at that time, 93% of the labor force.
Okay. Shubhmoy, what can we expect when we are talking about, Finance Minister making a proposal to set up a committee, in the finance bill itself, making that announcement that a committee will be set up to look into these demands or these proposals which are coming in, the representations which are coming in vis-a-vis NPS. What is it that we can look forward to?
Yeah, Vishal, first thing is that the government is making it clear, the central government is making it clear that it's taking head on the issue about the new pension scheme, the national pension scheme. And as Ms. Meena Chaturvedi rightly pointed out, this was one of the most significant reform that was done in India in post-2000 in the entire financial architecture. We needed that pension reform, and it was done after a considerable amount of debate. And that pension reform now is getting sort of pushed back, or there's a threat to it being pushed back, because many states are saying that we want to go back to the old pension scheme, which means that essentially it doesn't matter what a government employee has. Is basically saying that the government employee, just for being a government employee, will get a pension. Now, remember the point that she made, 93% of our workforce is in the unorganized sector. So that means the poorest person is actually going to finance the pension of a richer worker. I mean, how much of an injustice is that? We are talking about inequality, we are talking about inequity. I mean, I'm surprised that some political parties actually say that going back to old pension scheme is good. And at the same time, they talk about removing inequity. I mean, how ridiculous is that idea? The new pension scheme clearly says that your pension will be linked to what the instruments earn in the market.
Okay.
It might, and as of now, the returns that they're showing even now is about 9.2% for central government employees and 9.1% for, which is good. But point is that whether it's good or bad, it has to be linked to what the economy does. A government employee cannot say that I get pension simply because I was a government employee, and so therefore I am entitled to a largesse from the state. This is ridiculous. So what the finance minister has done is rightly that she said that we'll have a committee. This committee will examine all aspects of it. If there are genuine criticism against the national pension scheme, there always are room for improvements. Those will be improved, those will be changed. And remember, the states who are asking back for the return to the old pension scheme are saying that all the money that we have deposited, it's about 7 trillion till now, give us back that money and then we'll put it back in the old pension scheme. Obviously, they can't do it from the money they're currently getting from their budget. So this is like, unpacking the Indian fiscal order, which is what many of the states had been asking for.
Okay.
So all those things have sort of stopped, what the finance minister is saying is that we don't accept it, and we look into only what is a genuine grievances and go along with it. So those are therefore I would say that this is a very significant step, and hopefully this will send out the right signal that it has to be thought through. You can't just make a political platform to demand a rollback. Okay.
Dr. Charan Singh, we would also like to hear your views on the issue of this pension of government employees and the correlation with the fiscal prudence. What's the path ahead? How do we move ahead? There are two views coming in, and from both sides. Obviously, there might be implicit political, explicit political reasons as well. But when we look at it from an economic angle, what's the best way forward?
So look, I was at the Reserve Bank at that point of time, and looking at the state finances, I can share some thoughts as well as data with you. Just imagine that the pension expenditure was 3% of total revenue receipts of the state governments in 1980. And because longevity is increasing, it rose to 10% of revenue receipts by 2002. Just imagine the jump it took place from 3% of revenue receipts to 10% of revenue receipts in about 20 years. Now, if this is the trend that would have continued, it would have exploded. These are undefined benefits, and the liabilities are rising rapidly, and the deficit of the state governments is rising rapidly. Because these were taken care and removed from the budget, the progress was far slower. It was around 11.5% of the revenue receipts in the latest budget of all the state governments put together. When it comes to the center, 6% of revenue receipts was the pension bill in 1991. It rose to 8% by 2002. And then the new pension scheme was set in. If it had not been set in, again, it would have been on a trajectory and it would have exploded. Right now, with what has been done, the new pension scheme, it is around 8.5% of revenue receipts. Looking at the period 2004, that is the time when we were thinking about the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act, both for the center and the state. The fiscal situation was really bad, though ad hoc treasury bills, which had started much earlier in 74, had been curtailed by 93. By 97, we had curtailed them further. The deficits and the government guarantees trajectory was still very high. It was only prudent at that point of time that there is containment of this pension scheme. Many committees had been set up. One of the most important committees was by the P.K. Bhattacharya, Center and State, and they studied the trajectory of the pension funds. And they realized that if this is the way it goes, the gross fiscal deficit as well as the debt to GDP ratios will go and explode further. Even today, done the containment, if you look at pension as part of revenue expenditure, in many states, it is above 16%. 16% of the total revenue expenditure is being taken away by pension. Many states above 16%. In case of Uttar Pradesh, it is around 17%. In case of Kerala, it is about 18%. In case of Himachal Pradesh, it's about 19%. So these are very high expenditure. So I think the government, rightly so, and it's prudent. There is a complaint. There's no doubt about it. With COVID, what has happened is suddenly the realization has set in that the new pension scheme is a very difficult scheme, gives you a paltry sum. That's why the worry, because many untimely deaths have taken place and pension amounts, when it came to realization, are so apparent that the amounts are small, vis-a-vis the old pension scheme where one would get 50% of the last salary drawn with a DA on top of it, which was reasonable. Now that's not the case. So obviously, the states have started saying, employees have started saying, seen after COVID that the amounts are very small and therefore they want to go back to the old pension scheme. But if you look at the sustainability of debt and deficits and finances of both of the center and state governments, according to the figures that I've just shared with you, government has to be very cautious. And that is why I think the finance minister very prudently has given it to the panel to look at various aspects of where would the trajectory be, what would be the state burden, and if pension with increasing longevity is going to preempt most of the revenue receipts and expenditure, how are you going to incur infrastructure funding and financing?
So it's a deep correlation when we're talking about the pension bill and the fiscal prudence part there as well. Mr. Chaturvedi, you explained very well in advance in your first response about what the new pension scheme is all about, how it came about, and these figures given by Dr. Charan Singh as well do support that contention that fiscally it was not at all prudent to go ahead and continue with that. But the question which I'm asking here is that with the setting up of this committee, what aspects are we looking at when we move into the committee? What aspects might be re-looked at or might be looked at, and then perhaps the path ahead when we are talking about the pension issues related to government employees, be it central or state?
Right. I will take off from where Shubhmai left. is a reform which took place almost 20 years ago. And if the stakeholders want a review of it, I think the Honorable Finance Minister has done an excellent job to create a transparent committee to look into it. What I feel as an initial architect, part architect of this system, is that we have not passed on the correct information about the new pension scheme to our employees. And there are certain gray areas which we need to clarify. For example, the old pension, it was available only to those who would complete 33 years of service or take voluntary retirement after 20 years. Whereas this is a pension that you can receive at any time when you decide to leave the government. It is highly portable. You can move from the public sector to the private sector. And this entire concept of the government abandoning its responsibility and not contributing to the pension of its employees is also another falsehood, because they are doing it upfront now. I believe for a contribution of 10% that the employee makes every month, the government is making a matching contribution of 14% towards the pension. Okay. The flexibility that the employee has to multiply it. If I start very early, if 22 years is the average age when a government servant joins, the power of compounding, the power of choosing the instrument of investment, going into equity when I am young, over a period of 30 years, I can say that the possibilities are that the pension that you received at the end of this scheme may be higher than 50% of what you are getting under the old pension scheme. Okay. So there are a lot of gray areas. There are a lot of myths about the new pension scheme that should be clarified, and we should put them across very transparently and educate our employees, and not allow this very fiscally prudent issue to become an emotive issue. Okay. Many economic reforms die an early death. Indeed. Because they become politically emotive issues. Okay. I think time has come for the government to share information, to explain the rationale behind this. If you look at the latest report of the Reserve Bank of India, you will see that they have stated that almost 25% of revenue, tax revenue of states on an average is eaten up by the pensions. This despite the fact that in the year 2004, pension reforms had been brought in. If you go back to the old pension system, which is based on defined benefit rather than defined contribution. Okay, indeed. We'll have to wait for the committee's report there, which has been proposed to be set up by the Finance Minister on this issue. But before we bring this discussion to an end, Shubhmoy, quickly, going back to the amendments in the Finance Bill, and just one larger question, and I'll request you to summarize it as quickly as possible. What do those amendments mean for common people like you and me, or somebody who's watching the show, in terms of the changes in the taxation part there? Well, it's consistent. That's the most important part. The problem with many of the amendments to Finance Bill that are often brought, and Ms. Meena Chaturvedi has been there in Finance Ministry, so she'll bear with me on this point, that often the Finance Ministers have had to roll back policies. This time there's no rollback, and this is something that's been happening consistently over the last few years, which is good, because what it does is it provides consistency in the way taxes are applied. And by making a clear definition of where interest income is, where other tax arbitrages are, like remember in the Finance Bill itself, the high value insurance schemes have been brought under tax net. Okay. But it's basically ensuring that tax should not be the basis for persons making investments. It should be the importance or the usefulness of that particular instrument, which should guide investment decisions. Okay. So there it is. Consistency is the key part out there. Thank you, Shubhmoy. Dr. Charan Singh as well for sharing your views, and Ms. Meena Chaturvedi also. Thank you, ma'am, for sharing your insights and valuable inputs there. As our experts were pointing out, various aspects of the amendments which have been brought by the Finance Minister in the Finance Bill, and also that proposal to set up a committee on the issue of pension of government employees. We'll keep a close watch on all these issues and come back to you next week again with different topics. Till then, keep watching Sansad Television. Thank you.